I'm Matthew Hattersley. I'm head of Clarion's commercial teams. I help businesses with contracts, IT contracts, data protection, but also one of the things we really focus on is helping with policy documents, particularly around governance issues, whether it be data governance or whether it be legislative issues like modern slavery or anti-bribery. Astrid is the head of sustainability at a business called Techbuyer. Techbuyer is a fast-growing global business headquartered in Harrogate that it doesn't recycle, but it reuses IT components in the IT industry. It contributes to the circular economy. It can help businesses have a more environmentally sound way of sourcing IT assets. And since joining in 2017, you've helped establish a fantastic ESG program that I think will be the envy of any business, really. And the aim of this session is for us to learn from Astrid, because relatively, I think at low external cost, she's built this fantastic ESG program. And not only that, but she is in a position where she's influencing national and international frameworks to try and make them more relevant for her industry, the IT industry. And I think anyone in any industry can draw inspiration from this. And I think another important piece here is that even though Techbuyer is an IT business on one level, actually one of its standout features is its sustainability, and so rather than sustainability being a drag on this business, actually the sustainability and the ESG agenda is a major contributor to the brand of Techbuyer. And so, yeah, we're going to have a fireside chat. That's why the chairs. No fire, but it's nice. Doesn't feel at all awkward, which is, I'm sure, a relief. What we're going to do is I'm just going to ask Astrid some questions, and as we go through, if you want to contribute to that, then please also ask some questions, and we'll leave some time at the end so that we can fit some more things in. But Astrid will be sharing some kind of background, but hints and tips that will help any business that's wanting to establish an ESG program. So let's start with question one, like the big question. So I think Techbuyer, the very nature of Techbuyer, with it having almost contributing to the circular economy, naturally is a sustainable business. But I think when you joined, you took it from being a naturally sustainable business to a business where ESG was at the very forefront, where it was measurable, and actually really you kind of stepped up the governance processes. And I wonder if you could just explain kind of what you saw when you arrived and some of the steps that you took to move it along.
Okay, I think the first thing to point out is that I didn't do it, we did it. But I guess that my role in the organisation was to be one of the few in the early days that was looking outwards at the landscape, because when I joined there was about 90 people, looking at Richie, my boss, about 90 people working for the company, and we were fast growing then. We're still fast growing now. And when you've got that kind of business environment, you often don't have time to look outside. Everybody's focused in making what you've got work better and making it work as it grows, which is, as I'm sure everybody's aware, a massive challenge. So I came in and I was allowed to look outside the company and look at what was happening outside of that, and I was given time and support in doing that. One of the first things that I did was look at the 3 rules of marketing. Who are you? Who are you talking to? What's everybody else saying? And I read a book called Waste to Wealth, which was talking about the circular economy, and found that the business doesn't just contribute to the circular economy, it is a perfect model of product life extension, which is the most important one for IT equipment, given where we are with recycling, which I won't go into now. And then wrote a recommendation policy paper for the team who were managing the company, and said, look, what do you think? Shall we, given that it's perfectly placed to capitalise on this, what's the appetite for doing that in every single area of the business, not just in the products that we treated, but also in our packaging, also in our logistics, also in the way that we looked at the market and the way that we communicated the benefits of product life extension. Nobody understood very much about critical raw materials. So it's like, well, let's go find out, let's partner with organisations and let's work on the communication aspect of that, two-way communication, and try and maximise our benefit, I guess. And that's where it started. And then obviously the more you go on with that, the more you learn. The larger the company is, the more systems you have to have in place, because you can't just go and bother the boss over lunch and make him answer a big pile of questions. He tends to be a bit busy.
Yeah, I can imagine. One of the things just picking up there is the fact that you kind of integrated comms at a very early point into your ESG strategy, which I think has probably helped grow the brand actually as well. So you've made it a net contributor rather than at best a kind of neutral contribution to the company. Can you talk us through a little bit of that and the benefits of it?
Yeah, I mean, for where we were dealing with refurbished product, and we were dealing with a lot of fear, uncertainty and doubt that was put into the marketplace by the manufacturers. Some of the things that the manufacturers were saying 5 years ago are outrageous, really, when you look at them now, especially considering that they now all have their own circular economy practices. So rather than having us on the back foot and having to defend ourselves against the accusations of much larger companies, we said, well, no, we'll go on the front foot and articulate the benefits of this, and then we'll counter all the objections that we find in the marketplace. And we did that piece by piece by piece. So one of the big objections that you'll have to refurbished product is it's not as reliable as new. So we set up KTP with the university and we benchmark tested new versus refurbished equipment and proved categorically that it's the same performance. It either works or it doesn't. Another objection that you'll find is Moore's law. So the degradation of, the automatic doubling of efficiency with every successive generation. That's no longer true anymore. And we've written papers articulating that and looking at what that looks like for servers. That puts us on the front foot. And it also means that we have something to say to government inquiries. It means we have something to say to industry bodies. It means that we have something to say to research projects that are happening globally that are looking at circular economy and asking how that works. I guess from a strategic point of view, when you're looking at environmental policy, you should look at risk assessments, right? And look at your impact assessment over the entire company. We did that, but we also did the positive side of it. Like, what can we offer in terms of communications and understanding that people don't already have access to? It worked very well for us because of where we were and the things that we knew. But I would argue that probably lots of companies have that expertise they may not be aware of, and it's about finding that and then tying into organisations and developments that can support it.
Yeah, I think all businesses could benefit from some integration into circular economies. And I just wonder, you talked a little bit about product life extension being one of the kind of key benefits for Techbuyer, which a lot of us may not fully understand, and particularly not understand the benefits of that. And just to illustrate how, in your case, in that case, it's a real boon for ESG. Can you just articulate what that is about?
Well, product life extension is not just refurbishing equipment, it's extending the product life. So for us, that means looking at incoming product, disassembling it, shipping it as spares and upgrades for people who want to make their own products last longer in their companies, but also rebuilding products for new customer needs. A lot of times IT is retired every 3 years for no real other reason than contractual arrangements with large suppliers. And it's a habit that procurement departments have got into that's not necessary. You can save a huge amount on IT hardware if you choose to do it differently. It requires more human intervention, but the benefits are significant, and not just on the environmental reporting side, but also on the cost benefit side as well. So you're looking at up to an 80% saving if you go for a refurbished product. The government's looking at percentage increases in their own ICT estates, which they published as a policy in 2020, which then means that if as a company you're following the same practices, you're at an advantage when you go into their tenders.
Yeah, no, I can see how it becomes a powerful message. When you started talking, answering my first question, one of the things you mentioned was the importance of having structures in place so that you don't have to disturb management. But I think actually what you've done is integrate senior management into this. Do you want to talk about some of the benefits that you found with that?
In my role?
In your role, but also with the senior managers who you've integrated into the ESG process.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have worked if we hadn't had their buy-in, realistically. You can't do it on your own. You can't, as in my role, I can't just sit in an office and issue edicts. Nobody's going to listen to me. So I need senior managers to buy into it, and also potentially take risks in some areas. Like the KTP that we set up was, in the beginning it was mostly an environmental piece of research. How can we measure the energy efficiency of servers? How can we extend product life? How can we balance circular economy with energy efficiency, which had never been done in the market before? That cost about £100,000 to run that KTP, and it also cost quite a lot of company time at quite a senior level. Yeah. So in the beginning, the CEO was the chair of the KTP. We had the IT director as the technical lead. Looking at him now. So yeah, it basically it needs senior management to buy into it if you're going to take it to that next step, I guess. And it also needs people who are in senior positions to understand what it is they're getting themselves involved with. Because if you start communicating on a sustainability platform, you need to get it right. And that's increasingly true as time goes on, that the time for sticking a load of stickers on good things that we have done and writing a nice story-based sustainability report has passed. You actually need solid data to support what you're doing, and that requires a commitment from senior managers. It means proper KPIs, it means proper assessments, it means proper oversight of that. It means, in our case, that senior managers have direct access to our carbon footprint on a daily basis. But then the support from the finance department needs to come in to do the cost analysis of changes that we're going to make. It needs to be, taken seriously.
I think that's probably, for me, the defining characteristic of governance in the context of ESG is it's the ability of a business to take things seriously, but also be able to demonstrate to the outside world in an objective way that it takes things seriously. And just kind of using that to segue into a slightly different topic, I think it's possible to go with a number of different compliance frameworks. There are lots out there that either you can find yourself or you might be able to have recommended to you. And I just wonder how you went about finding an appropriate framework or developing an appropriate framework that worked for Techbuyer.
Okay, well, the good news is that there are a lot of frameworks out there that really SMEs or even medium-sized companies don't need to worry about. They're not designed for people of that size. So it was discounting the ones that you would see on the huge sustainability reports. And just looking for something that was more appropriate to run as a smaller organisation. So one of the ones that we started with very early on was the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which We started in 2019 when they were carrying out roadshows throughout the north of England and all over the country, actually, trying to get businesses to sign up for these. That's useful in that it allows companies to build confidence on sustainability across environmental, social and a little bit governments with partnerships and things like this, and articulate what they're doing well. So it's a really good stepping stone into measurable targets, which you have a defined approach to, which is accepted in the marketplace, which is you don't look at all 17 global goals, bit of an ask, and say, oh God, what do we do about all these? You have focus groups within the company, you identify the goals that mean the most to your stakeholders, your customers, and the product or service that you supply. You discuss those goal by goal, and you also look at the targets beneath each goal. So when you're looking at climate action, for example, most companies can't do a lot about that because it's about adaptation to climate change. But there might be another target underneath, like education or advocacy, that you can support. So understand what you're looking at, set your own measurable targets against that, set a limited time frame, and then go out and communicate that. That's really useful because it enables you to see a real benefit early on compliance issues and measuring things, because you go to governments and large companies and they are impressed that you have a framework to support the UN Sustainable Development Goals, because they all do as well. So that's a really good way of measuring positive progress, creating ambition, because you add stretch into those targets, and then engaging the workforce within that, because it's quite an easy to understand framework. So we set up a sustainability committee to support our targets against the global goals. It's a great way of kind of coming out of your own, I don't have a little room, I have a little desk, but coming out of my little desk and speaking to everybody in the company about what they're doing, and kind of getting a group momentum going ahead. Another framework that's really useful is carbon footprinting. Start small, start with your energy bills, look at scope 1 and 2 if that's all you can do, and just measure it. It's a bit time consuming, looking at the energy bill, carbon, count in this, and what we're going to do about Australia who's not reporting. What do we do about that? But it's a great confidence builder, and it allows you to understand a little bit more about what you're doing on the negative side. So how do we mitigate those negative impacts? And again, if you follow something like the SECR guidelines, that allows you to kind of put your foot in the water. So start with scope 1 and scope 2 and business travel, and then work up from there until you've eventually got a little bit more confidence to go to the next level. There are consultancies who can help you with the scope 3 side of things, because that will be more challenging. So you can shop around for little bits on the market. But we also find that having a carbon footprint program again helps communicate things with the people in our company. So we've got a regular monthly catch up with operations guys on what is our count this month, and also what we're doing about packaging. Just kind of keeps that communication going. And then the ISO 14001, if you're going to do any pre-qualification or tender documents, you need an environmental management system. The ISO 14001 is the most obvious, the most famous, and it'll marry up with any other ISOs that you've got, so you know how to run that framework. I'd suggest if you're going to do it properly, you would want to build in your own targets towards that. And to do that, you need to kind of understand the risk landscape that's applicable to your company. So we heard earlier on about food manufacturers, they're looking at the feed. We don't care about the feed, unsurprisingly, because we don't have any cows. What we do care about is critical raw materials and the waste hierarchy. So it's about kind of educating yourself on what the issues are, having an honest conversation about where your risks are, and then building a strategy around that, which is then managed by things like the 14001.
How did you go about creating measurable targets and know that they were genuinely comparable or better than other companies? Is there a central repository of targets or a helpful guide?
No. With great difficulty is the honest answer. For us, there's the carbon footprint, which creates a measurable target, which gets us into the habit. There's the 14,001, which creates that framework of constantly questioning, where are we with this? Where, keeping it at the forefront of your mind, and the global goals, which is a measurable target. For the rest of it, when you're looking at our supply chain, you're looking at critical raw materials. You're looking at the fact that you can't recover these materials with conventional recycling technologies. And in fact, you won't be able to for 5-10 years. So for us, when we're looking at our impacts as a company, we're looking at a waste hierarchy. So how do we take it out of landfill to recycling? Well, we did that right at the beginning. But then how do we make more materials get recovered? Well, we go up to reuse. We go up to better quality materials. And that's a concept that we're using to change everything in the company. So we know where we are with product, we know where we are with recycling partners. We've got accreditations that prove that we've checked things right to the end of the line, which kind of gives us visibility on the reverse supply chain. But then we're using that concept to change the elements of packaging that we don't like, piece by piece. And we're doing that from the inside out, because we know that there are materials that have got issues, and then we're saying, okay, we're going to replace that, so let's go to the British Plastics Foundation and find out what we're replacing it with and how much better it is. When it comes to actually measuring progress towards that, that's tricky, because do you do it by weight, or do you do it by spend, or do you do it by mass, or do you do it by product type? How do you do that? So I guess for those sorts of things, you go out to the market for advice. The LEP is a great resource for this. They have funds available on circular economy. They've got consultancies who can come in and give you paid for advice on this. And then it's a question of working with them to find systems that work for you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that fascinated me when we spoke last month was the fact that even though to me the circular economy you're creating and the fact that you're extending product life seems to be an obvious major environmental benefit, actually a number of the frameworks, in fact most of the frameworks, don't really recognise what you're doing in a way that allows you to make, I guess, product claims that are backed by a framework. I wondered what you're doing about that, because I don't think you're just sitting back quietly and accepting the status quo, are you?
No, it's not really what we're like.
No.
So there is an issue with the greenhouse gas protocol reporting of refurbished equipment. So I won't go into the depths of this because I sense you all want some lunch. But the greenhouse gas protocol is making no distinction between new and refurbished equipment, although some people are reporting a saving. I guess I should explain why this is important. A server contains roughly a ton of embodied carbon. So that's the carbon that was used to mine the materials, manufacture the server and transport it to first use. So circular economy would say, well, if we can avoid manufacturing that new equipment, we're saving that amount of carbon. We're also saving a huge amount of other things like critical raw materials, of which some of which are coming to the end of their mined existence within like decades, and they're also undergrowing demand from the renewable sector for the infrastructure. So we're saving the critical raw materials. We're also saving the social impact of some of the mining in some of the areas of the world where health and safety is not a top priority of the governments. But we can articulate that to the marketplace with carbon, because carbon is our new metric for talking about these things. We'll have to see what TNFD says, which is Task Force on Nature-related financial disclosures. But at the moment, there's no way of measuring that. So we're stuck with carbon. And when you're trying to articulate the value of avoiding that new production and taking on refurbished equipment, or selling your own equipment to the secondary market so that it can be reused by other people. There's no facility within the Greenhouse Gas Protocol to do that, not officially. Consultancies are saying, okay, so you have to argue your way around it. You just have to give another piece of paper, which kind of fights against having a standard in the first place, because there is no standard approach. It's kind of a legalistic approach. So we work with an international research project that looks at circular economy. And we're working with them and out through their networks to talk to people like Stanford University and other bodies like EcoInvent, who are the framework that look at materials usage. And we're going to put together a body to discuss this so that we can come out with a standardised approach. And also try and put out a paper so that we're highlighting this to the market. The only reason that we're doing this is because nobody else seems to be doing it. But when you're working on projects like that, it's not like we're going to put our name on it and just get it out there. If we can get people involved with that, then that's what we'll do. Which I guess touches on the approach of partnerships and engagement with wider bodies, which is kind of essential when you're trying to make change.
Yeah, I guess what it illustrates is that whatever your industry, whether it's tech or esoteric forms of manufacturing, there might not be a framework for you, but that shouldn't stop you actually lobbying to create a framework or measurable targets that are beneficial to your area to be able to articulate the environmental and social benefits of what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's probably very important to do it sector by sector, because each sector is going to face different challenges and different impacts. So if there's a sector body of companies, academic institutions, non-profits who come out together and say, we think this is the best way to approach it, then people will be grateful for that, right? Because it allows standardization and it allows parity and comparison between different organisations, which is in everybody's interest. And also, we don't have time, right? We don't have time to spend 15 years on this.
No, I think that's probably right. We're running out of time. Just quickly, one point. As part of what you've been doing here, your role became much more ESG sustainability focused as you've developed the ESG program. And I know that you've gone out and got some qualifications, and actually you would endorse that as a way of allowing to have internal skills that allow a business to actually own the process rather than simply buying it in and not necessarily owning it. And I just wondered if you'd talk through what qualifications you've got and what might be out there.
Yeah, so the most well-recognised body for environmentalism is IEMA, IEMA. And I have qualified as a full member of IEMA and also a chartered environmentalist, which means that I'm recognised as somebody who knows broadly what they're talking about when it comes to these issues. It's interesting to note that when you go for a full membership or a chartered status, a lot of the evidence that I had to supply to get that qualification was on basically stuff that I'd done with Techbuyer, things like the research and the advocacy with the Environmental Audit Committee, all that body of evidence kind of goes in there. The reason that I'd give IEMA a plug is that they have a programme that extends right from initial training courses for the workforce right up into strategic training for senior leaders. And what it gives companies is a method to train some of the awareness on some of the issues at every level of the company, which then makes it easier to make change because people are looking at ways that they can develop things and they can also fit that into a bigger picture.
Yeah, no, that's great. Just kind of continuing on this, we mentioned before ownership of the issues by the senior management is important, but it's one thing to have your senior leaders really involved in ESG, and it's another thing to have the people who are doing the job on the ground also as integrated into it. And yet I think you've managed to achieve that in a way that other businesses can learn from. And Would you just talk through some of the measures you've taken there?
Yeah, I mean, Techbuyer has traditionally had quite an open door policy. Like we don't have any doors is also a key thing. So it's always asked for ideas from the workforce on any area of the business. How do we make this better every single day? And that's something that was there in the company from the very, very, very early days. And because of the type of external communication we've done, we tend to get a workforce who's already interested in sustainability issues because of the advertising. And then you pair that with how do we make things better every single day, and you get a whole set of ideas coming from all different areas of the business on how can we improve repairs, how can we improve the materials that we use, how can we decrease travel miles. We have a monthly report that goes out to all users globally, which tells everybody about some of the things that we're doing internally and externally. So they've got this constant stream of, we are doing this as a business, we are looking at different ideas, which kind of encourages feedback from them. And then our department goes round different departments and has regular meetings with them to see what they're doing on reporting, whether they need any help with desktop research, whether they need any help like looking at funding opportunities to develop certain ideas. And then we have the sustainability committee. But I guess it all stems from company culture of being open to ideas from everybody, being aware that that's kind of what got the company to where it is today, is, listening and working together.
Yeah. Okay, no, thank you. We've talked a little bit about critical raw materials and the fact that, essentially critical raw materials are being mined out the ground, which is often a dangerous area in terms of modern slavery or, depending on the countries that are involved, anti-bribery or other social, economic reasons. And Techbuyer, although you're maybe reusing a lot of technology, actually your technology does originate in those locations. And I just wondered, in terms of managing an ethical supply chain, to what extent do you feel it's appropriate for a business of your size, a moderately sized business, to be investigating its supply chain?
I suppose you have to do as much as you can. I mean, in our case, the Responsible Business Association, I think they're called, have got a code of conduct that all the major manufacturers have signed up to. And if you look at the content of that code of conduct, it has got everything that the UN would advise in terms of, workforce protection, etc., etc. Yeah. So we are reliant on the fact that the large manufacturers have done their due diligence and presumably been audited on that, and that they have got the resources to go and visit the factories. Realistically, there's a limit on that, given what we know of Apple's manufacturing, for example, but also realistically, all memory in the world comes from one town in China. So there's not a lot of choice in your supply chain here. What we would try and articulate to customers is it's best to keep things within a local circular supply chain, so that you're trying to, the working conditions of the places that are supplying you directly.
And if we can't influence the big picture, what can we do to influence kind of positive approach through the supply chain?
Ask questions. The more people who ask questions, the more people at the back end of the supply chain are aware that people care. Just a psychological thing. So, one of our sister companies will be writing to the factories asking the question. The chances are we'll get the same paperwork as the big manufacturers did. They probably got a bank of it out back. But just act of asking kind of encourages change sometimes. Yeah. And that's something that, touch upon the prosumer movement. That's what they're all about as well.
Yeah. So I think just before we go to questions, I think what I've taken from this is by effectively having a self-directed ESG policy rather than kind of wholly adopting an external model, such as B Corp or something like that. What you've done is create a right-sized ESG policy that represents your business and isn't a drag on it isn't a drag on the business. It's actually a brand contributor. And I think for any business, I'm going to ask you a question in a moment. This is a long question, but we'll get there in the end. But for any business out here that maybe is at the start of an ESG cycle, maybe you have sustainability policies, maybe you've got some great CSR stuff, but actually what you've not started doing is the governance piece, not started measuring, not started putting it into a formal framework. And this is the big question. If you were to say one or two things that they might start with, the first steps along that journey of formalising what's there and making it into something better, what would you suggest?
Look at what's in front of you. Make an honest appraisal of what's in front of you, which is basically risks and opportunities, which you'll all be familiar with because you're business people. Think about the environmental side of that and the social side of that. As somebody was saying this morning, your impact on the environment and society, but also the reverse. You know, what are the risks and opportunities around those things, and what seems sensible to start with? And then look around at frameworks that help you address what seems sensible to start with. You mentioned B Corp. We have also used B Corp. We haven't used it as a framework for the business because we've got to a size where it's exceedingly expensive to become a member. But what we did do is we ran that, which is free at the point of use, on their website. And we ran that to identify areas that we could potentially do better. And we used those as, you know, key points in the sustainability department that we could work on within a given time frame.
Kind of work out what you've got and then, I suppose, take the first step forward, isn't it?
Yeah, and the frameworks that I mentioned, like the global goals, I'm a fan of because it allows people to be positive for once in their lives around what can become a very depressing topic. It allows people to be positive and build confidence. Carbon footprinting, I think, is a necessary thing for all businesses. ISO 14001, easy to get your heads around because you'll probably all have the 9001. And then B Corp is a nice free tool out there to look at things that you could be doing better and give yourself some ideas. Start from there, and there'll be a bunch of other frameworks that are available, but they're probably sector specific. So I can't answer that question for you with that, because I don't know your sectors.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your kind of answering all these questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.